It's true. You're right. I mean, every time someone clicks subscribe on our podcast, it is validating for me. It is the approval I have been seeking my whole life. You're right. And I love these conversations and someone who's listening and who cares. And
Oh, I mean, yeah, I mean, this is a big improvement. You should come back weekly.
Yeah, so I'm a clinical and forensic neuropsychologist. I think that's probably the one title that would encapsulate all of those different board certifications.
you do a lot of one-on-one with patients, right?
Yes. Yeah. A lot of one-on-one. Yeah. So I have a private practice in Manhattan Beach, and that's where I see most of my patients when we're not in COVID. But obviously, if I'm working on a criminal case, then I'm seeing them in the prisons. If I'm working on at a hospital.
Ooh, so if it's a criminal case, that just got like 10 times interesting. And so how does that work? Is that like if an inmate is sad and down, or?
So they supposedly have prison psychologists who actually treat these people. I really only get brought in when there's a legal issue. So like right now I'm working with like this person who probably, honestly, it's so sad, but he's probably wrongfully convicted and he's been in prison for 25 years. Yep.
Oh my God.
He like studied law while he got into prison and like wrote his own case, like wrote his own complaint. And the judge basically granted him a private attorney. Like, I guess they have this program where like, if you make a compelling case, the judge won't like put you through the public defender thing again. They'll actually get you a private defender. And usually the private defender's doing it pro bono. It's like they're one of their corporate policies to do 1 or 2 cases like this a year. So anyway, that's one of the ones that I'm working on now. But so I was supposed to go to see him in the prison.
Wow. So you're helping him like cope with like reality.
This one is every case is different, but yeah, sometimes I'm trying to evaluate them to decide, are they competent to stand trial? Do they understand right from wrong? Sometimes you're asked to estimate recidivism rate, which is like a dangerous game because it's just like statistics and what, it's like, how can you know? But basically sometimes the judge will say, I want to know if this person is going to like commit another crime if I let him out, and then like, do they know right from wrong?
You're like, no pressure on Dr. Judy. So what do you say? Let him out. Don't let him out. Like,
oh, I know. It's like, and then if he gets out and kills somebody and it's my fault, like it's nuts. So anyway, I do some cases like that. And those are like really intense because I go into the prisons and they lock me up just like the inmates for the day. I get all of my personal belongings taken away. I have no way of communicating with anybody except through these prison guards. And one time I was left in a maximum security prison by myself in an isolation room for over an hour because a fight broke out in the yard, and it was all hands on deck. And like I was their last priority, but I had no idea what was going on. I had no way to communicate with anyone. So that hour was like scared straight for me. I don't understand how that program's not supposed to work. Cause after that I was like, oh yeah, like never, right? Like I'll never do this again. No.
So I'll tell you something that I didn't think we were going to be talking about today because of where you went, but I will tell you a fact. I have been on death row twice in my life.
What? Are you kidding me? Oh my God. Whoa. I don't even know how to process that. That's crazy.
I was not a resident, an inmate. I was a journalist in a previous life doing an interview. And so,
I thought you were going to tell me you were wrongfully convicted twice and got out twice. I was like, I don't know. I get to the context of the story, Also, you said I was on death row. You didn't say.
I was.
No, you didn't say like I was a visitor to death row. Like that would be different,
The first time, by the way, this is a trip. This is taking a whole different direction. The first time I was 16 years old and I was going to high school in New Jersey, and a teacher in our class had said, what's one project you want to do that'll take the whole year, whatever. And I just started writing letter after letter to all these prisoners around the country. And randomly, one guy in Florida, who was in Florida State Prison, who was 17 years old at the time, responded. And about 2 weeks after he responded, I was in Stark Prison in Florida, where sitting across, and I have a picture of it, we'll put it up, talking to a 17-year-old young man sentenced to death in Florida doing an interview with him. And what was crazy of all that is I did know that ultimately his sentence ended up being commuted to life in prison with no parole somewhere along the line. But I looked up, Googled him for whatever reason about 3-4 years ago, and he was in the news. And looking at him today, how our lives 30 plus years later have each gone on, and he was in a court hearing seeing if he could get paroled and seeing how seeing how his life had progressed. And then the second time I was in Reno, Nevada, working for a TV news affiliate, and there was a young man who was about to be executed, who was a juvenile at the time. And we went and met with him and interviewed him and spoke with him right across from him, and he was executed. And it was
Oh,
and it was, I
wow.
remember, I did not see the execution, but it was a crazy, crazy thing. So anyway, I have been on death row twice, not a resident, but it's a fascinating.
It's the way you set it up. I was like, do you have some wrongfully convicted story to tell me? Because I would
Do these
really.
look like prison tattoos? These are expensive, man. I mean, you got to like wait a long time for these artists that do this.
Okay, so how many different sessions did you go to finish all your tattoos?
I don't even know how many I have, to be honest, because so many of them start to run together after a while. So I think if I said individual pieces, I think you could say somewhere between like 25 and 30 pieces that go like all down. And I'm not going to totally, whatever, but they go all. And, I was texting the other day with one of the artists that is just spectacular. He's one of the top guys in the world. I've been supposed to get in with him right before COVID hit. It's been a while. So
Yeah.
I'm feeling naked. I need some more. It's my therapy.
Yeah, I just like I'm always curious about like what starts that process for people, because I've heard from a lot of people that it is therapeutic for them, and like it's exciting, and like they really look forward to their next session and getting a new one and stuff. But I've never been interested in it. I think probably because I'm afraid of the needles.
Honestly, the second that the needle starts, I'm like, like I literally have 70 times so far vowed that this is the last one, because at first, but then it's done, and if you don't like them, you wouldn't keep doing them.
Right.
I guess everyone has their own reasons. I've never asked people specifically. For me, it really, truthfully, no one's even asked me, but since you bring it, it is therapy for me. I mean, mine tend to be very enigmatic. They tend to, at least for me, have a lot of thought and meaning behind them that mean something to me. A lot of times they're in different languages, or they're symbols, or they're things that wouldn't not necessarily make sense to the average person. On my hand actually is a clock that a guy named Turan, who's phenomenal. He's a place in Bang Bang, New York, and it's a clock, and then the glass breaks and there's little birds flying
Ah.
away, but then the clock itself is on 7-11. And for me, this one that we called was Time Flies, and 7-11 is my oldest daughter's birthday, July 11.
Cool.
And it was about 5-6 years ago when I looked at her one day, and she was like 7 or and 8, and I just realized the time was going so quick, and I wasn't stopping to take it in. And I was always so work, make money, plan for college for her, do this, do that, whatever. I was always going, going, going. And the truth is, I still do. I don't have that in me. I don't really have an off switch, but for me, is therapeutic. I didn't say they're a cure. They're therapeutic. They're like Post-it notes all over with each one. So it does remind me. So that's kind of my process. But
Fun. Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah, my sister gets them, mostly to commemorate certain things. Like for her, it's like there's a certain anniversary, or there's like a friendship, like she's trying to commemorate something, and that's when she goes and gets them. But they're like baby ones. She's got like a tiny one here. Like, they're like little ones that are dotted around her arms and legs.
For me, what's funny is I have a harder time deciding like which apple to pick. I'll sit there for 10 minutes, but yet I can make decisions to permanently put something all over my body. Like, oh, that's, once I land on the design, like there's no fear that it's permanent, but I will leave the store without buying the apples, not because I'm cheap, but I couldn't commit.
We all have our commitment issues with different things. And for me, definitely any kind of permanent marking on my body, like I definitely a commitment phobe there. But I'm the opposite of you. I'll just go into the store and it's like I'll just pick up whatever. I mean, obviously I'm not going to pick up a rotten apple, but I'm like very fast in the grocery store. Yeah, so we're different there. I'm very, very fast in grocery stores.
Being, a psychologist and all of the advanced training and experience you have in all things related of the mind, the head, and Does it ever kind of mess with you where you start to question why you're making certain decisions and you're like, what part is Dr. Judy and what part can you just be yourself and not even self-analyze yourself in every aspect of your life, or do you separate clean?
You know what? I think I've gotten a lot better at not analyzing myself. But when I first started, my very first psychology class, I remember the first thing that the professor told us was, okay, this is the class where you're going to learn about all the different clinical disorders. And he said, you're going to want to diagnose yourself with like all of them. So don't do it. But like, please be like, do I have ADHD? Do I have, maybe I have panic disorder. Maybe I'm OCD. And, I'll say those things colloquially. I mean, I feel like pretty fortunate that I don't have any nefarious conditions, but I do remember when I was in my 20s and going through the program and learning about schizophrenia. And they were saying, the most common age of these severe illnesses, people usually have their first psychotic break in their early to mid 20s. And we're all like, okay, well, that's how old we are. So we're like, which one of us, is going to break? And like, once I hit my 30s, I was like, you know what? I'm pretty safe. Like, the fact that I don't have schizophrenia now, the chances are much smaller that I'll have that later, because it just, learning about that, it was one of those things where you understand like how debilitating something like schizophrenia can be. And, I think for so many people, there's a misunderstanding of that illness. But unfortunately, if you're somebody who has schizophrenia, you will be on medication for your entire life. Like, you just have to, so I think that was probably one of the things that I was like very scared about in my 20s, learning about this. But as I've gotten older, I've gotten much better at not analyzing people in my personal life. I feel like I did that a lot more when I was younger. Similar, like definitely the people I was dating, I was like analyzing them because it was just so easy.
I was going to say, man, like your poor husband. I mean, if I'm your husband and he's like upset, whatever it is going on, and you can get upset, and you're probably like, I think you're having a narcissistic reaction, and really where that's, I mean, is that what, are you like kind of just,
I gotta shut it down. It's like a because if I want my marriage to survive and I don't want this marriage to go down the tank, I need to not analyze him, right? I mean, so it's something that I basically have to stop myself from doing. But every once in a while it creeps in there, like sometimes I just can't help myself, and I'll just be like, well, that's because you had that experience when you were a child. And he's like, don't go there, please. Like,
I am not one of your patients.
Don't go there. But he does the same thing to me, and actually so do members of my family. So somebody who does this to me all the time is my sister. Sometimes if I can't solve a problem for her, she'll be like, oh, well, some psychologist you can't even solve your own sister's problems. I'm like, no, that's why doctors don't see their own family members as patients. Like, I'm not supposed to like solve your problem for you.
Anyone who has a career, that becomes part of you. For sure. And so like for you, like how could you turn it off? I would imagine for psychologists, people in your line of work, it's much harder, because if you're talking to a friend, if you're talking to a girlfriend, there always is that sense of, am I talking to Dr. Judy, the head doctor, psychologist, or am I talking to my friend, my sister, my wife?
Yeah. And I feel like there's kind of this, urban myth, which maybe has some truth to it, that a lot of people get into the mental health profession because like they just love fixing other people, or they want to fix themselves. I think I got into psychology because I realized I was good at giving people advice. Like, people would come to me for advice, but then it got to a point where it got exhausting. Like, I didn't want my friendships to be all about that. And also in my 20s, my romantic relationships were like that. Like, I felt like I was just like fixing everybody. I just kept like being attracted to people that like I needed to fix. And luckily,
I'm not laughing at you, but I'm like, I could see how that happens. I mean, yeah.
It was like everybody this is like what happened in my 20s. Like, some guy will say, oh, like, I'm broken and I can't love anybody. I'm like, but I'm going to make you love me, and I'm going to fix you so you're not broken. And that was really, I think, characteristic of my 20s. And of course,
by the way, that was one of my pickup lines at Arizona State. I don't know that anyway, that was like, we had a book and that was in the book.
Yeah, I don't know. I was like definitely in my 20s attracted to people that I needed to fix. But you know what? Luckily that went away when I actually had patients that I actually had to try to help. And I just wanted my personal life to be peaceful and serene. And somebody who, I mean, we all have our own faults, but I was not then attracted to anybody who was like that broken, because I really didn't have the time. I mean, you kind of have to come in like ready to go. You know what I mean? Like, we all have our faults, but like if you're coming in expecting one person to fix you, like it's a really tough go if you're trying to make a relationship from there, you know? So
Do you ever have an initial meeting with someone and you just make a decision, however you let them know that you're not going to treat them?
yeah, yeah. The people that I say no to are people who seem to have extremely poor boundaries.
Yeah.
And you know, a lot of clients have boundary problems, and that's not
What's an example of that? What's an example of poor boundaries in your profession?
like somebody who might call you 30 times like
Okay.
on a weekend, you know,
Right.
and it's not an emergency, you know, but they just kind of expect you to be at their beck and call, and you've given them the feedback that that's not how you work, but they still kind of demand that that's how you work. And so but I think a lot of people have boundary related issues. I don't have any issues with working with them, because a lot of people have, for example, borderline personality traits, and that's like a very hallmark sign of a lot of people with that particular condition. And I don't have an issue with that as long as like they're willing to learn and they're willing to take feedback. But I've definitely come across a couple of people who don't have those boundaries.
Man, my team at launch is going to watch this and they're going to be like, okay, so your boss is not supposed to call you 30 times on a weekend. And I'm like, wait, take that part out. She didn't mean that. But you know, it's funny because it all comes back to the word that you use, which is boundaries, and also reading people. Because in all seriousness, even in our context, I mean, as an agency, we work one way, you know, success or failure. There's no in betweens. We do a campaign, it's either a huge success or a failure. And that's the mentality that the people we have here that thrive. There's some people that, you know, on Monday through Friday, they go 110% balls to the wall. And that is because they have to check out and decompress Saturday and Sunday. And if that's someone's vibe, man, I respect that 1,000% and give them 1,000% space. Then there's like 6 or 7 of us here, myself included, where we wouldn't know what the hell to do with ourselves Saturday and Sunday.
I'm with you guys. I'm with you and your 6 or 7 people who feel that way. I mean, I think, I mean, do you believe that you're a workaholic? Like, do you see yourself as a workaholic?
I think it's part of my DNA. I don't think of it as work. I know it's work, but it is kind of, I mean.
Yeah. I feel like that workaholic label is like what society wants to label us, but like I just kind of see it as that's just how I've been my whole life. And it's not like every day, even though I work every single day, like 7 days a week, it's not like every single day I don't have time for fun. Like I'm not that person.
Right.
Like every day I run, I do all other things. Like I met one of your producers, Dana, today on the Greenbelt in Hermosa, you know, because I was in the middle of my run. And so I have time for leisure every day, but I would have a hard time like just sitting and not doing anything that I consider productive on a weekend. Weekends are the best time to get things done because there's less emails. And I'm much more productive on the weekend sometimes, because in the weekday, like you just get interrupted all the time, you know, phone calls.
Yeah.
Impromptu.
Yeah, my worst time is like Monday through Friday, like after 8:30 to like 2 in the afternoon, because I am bombarded with tasks and I'm like putting out a million fires, managing different financial things, what have you. So it's like later in the evenings and the super early mornings and the weekends, that's when I can like step back and take a view of it all and be creative, plan, strategize so that I can execute during the week. But everyone's got their own rule. But it's funny. So you met Dana, and I think because we'll talk about your book for sure, which is Stop Self-Sabotage, and you were nice enough to talk about this in a minute, and you signed a couple of copies too that people are going to be able to get a shot at. We'll figure that out on our Instagram. So it was nice of you. So she met you to grab the books, but so she's like the hybrid. So for us, and we'll have to diagnose her as well because I need some ammunition. And she's here in the room over to my left. So it's fun because now I get to talk about her, but not behind her back because she can hear me, but she can't do anything. She checked and interrupt me, and she can't hear you. I mean, just threw a dart across. Okay, that was good. Yep. That's healthy. Add that to the diagnosis. So you have the people who are like 24/7, you know, type boom, boom, boom. Then you have the people, it's like Monday through Friday, balls to the wall, weekends. You ain't going to find them anyway. You know, they're on the road, camping, whatever. Then you've got like the outliers or the hybrids. And that's what she falls under, which is that like sometimes you will get like 5 things from her on a Saturday or Sunday or 8 or 9 o'clock at night, which are go, 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 everything. And usually it's all whatever, but sometimes if you then follow up or reach back out on something different that same day, I'll get like the hand reaching through the phone and choking me like, it's my weekend, man. So it's like, I got it. So I'm like, wait a minute. So it's like that, hybrid of some people turn on and off during the weekends or their evenings. And I guess the boundary is you got to kind of let them flip their own switch or they throw darts at you in the middle of your podcast.
Yeah, I think so. And my husband is the balls to the wall, like when he's at work. And then when he comes home, that's like his relaxation time. But I work from home all the time. So he'll come home and he'll be like, let's hang out. And I'm like, I'm working, So we have to sort of have our compromises and kind of have to accept each other for who we are, because my job is just not the kind of job where I don't work from home. And like you, I've conditioned myself, even though I used to be a night owl, I've conditioned myself to wake up earlier, because that like 2-3 hours in the morning, from like 5 in the morning to like 8, it's awesome. Like no one's bothering me. I'm catching up on my emails from the day before, and you get a lot done because there's just not a lot of interruption.
Let's talk about your book for a second, because I've been able to read parts of it, even highlighted a few parts, but Self-Sabotage, Stop Self-Sabotage. What was the idea behind this? And give us the top line.
Well, I think everybody self-sabotages to some degree or another. All human beings, it's universal. It goes back to our evolutionary roots. And that's why I decided to write it, because I looked around me at my colleagues, at my family, my friends, my patients, even in some instances myself. And I was like, wow, we all do it, whether it's procrastination or getting into relationships that aren't good for us, stopping ourselves from getting more successful in our careers, meeting our health and diet and fitness goals. At some point we say something about we want this goal, and then at some point we lose steam or we trip up on accident, and then we don't get back on. And I was trying to understand why that is and help people find a way to solve that problem scientifically. I don't think men self-sabotage their careers as much as women, just based on like scientific research, because women tend to have more of what we call imposter syndrome. They're worried that somehow people aren't going to listen to their message as a trend. More women worry about that than men. But men self-sabotage all other kinds of things just as much as women, and maybe more. And those are like health and diet and fitness goals, intimate relationships. That happens a lot. And so I don't think that it's, a primarily gendered problem.
I remember the TV show The Sopranos, obviously. Huge hit TV show, Tony Soprano, mobster killer, everything else in the show. And then he ends up seeing a psychiatrist. I remember reading at the time that as that show began to pick up steam and viewership and popularity, that the percentage of men actually seeking out professional mental health help for the first time in their life, I'd read that it was through the roof at that window. And one of the reasons specifically was that it almost desensitized, took away the stigma for a lot of guys who had grown up thinking and believing and being either taught from their own fathers or what you see on TV that, manly men, real men would not go and sit down with Dr. Judy and sit on her couch and cry his eyes out over a box of tissues. And that really was a game changer in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And I think that is such a good point, because we really do look to like film and TV and entertainment for our personal heroes, and even for people that we almost see as mentors. And if they do something, then it might be okay for us to do something. So actually the mental health profession has been talking a lot about that, that there's certain films and TV shows that actually help to destigmatize mental illness, which is awesome, like open the door for people to get treatment if they need to. And then of course there are shows that actually make it worse, the shows that are maybe actually more stigmatizing, shows that portray therapy incorrectly, portray therapists as, people who like actually are really screwed up themselves and like sleep with their patients, like in the movie Departed. I was actually I thought that was ridiculous. I was like, okay, yeah, because that happens every day. And all therapists are hot, and all therapists just hit on you at some point during your therapeutic relationship. So that did definitely irritate me. Even Game of Thrones and like all the great shows and TV and film included. Now it's always about like no, all of these people are multidimensional, and even the villains, like sometimes you like the villains. Like, so for, I mean, obviously in Game of Thrones, it's very hard to say that there was really truly one hero that was, you know, flaw free. But one of my favorite people was Cersei, and people were like, that girl is like a biatch. And I'm like, but no, but she's so cool. Like, I'm like, she's so complicated and she's a leader, and people are like, that's really weird that you like Cersei. I'm like, no, but sometimes you see these villains and you see the redeeming qualities, and you also see how they grew up and how that affected why they became the way that they did, because she was very hardened, but she grew up with this crazy dad, you know, so it makes sense. And so I just felt like, you know, Tony Soprano, he was that type of person, and he was one of the first people that people were thinking, you know what, this is not just like some crazy gangster in a movie. This is somebody who probably is insecure, you know, and has so many problems, but he's also very loving, but then he was also killing people. It's so confusing. Like, what do you do with that?
At the end of the day, the aspects of these shows and the characters, like Game of Thrones, where there is politicking, conniving, backstabbing, alliances, broken alliances, loyalty, honor, deceit, deception, love, passion, dying for what you love, cheating, giving up on someone, you know, all of those, you don't have to be in a Game of Thrones setting. We can all relate to those things in life.
Yes. And I think that that's actually why, even right now during the pandemic, you know, it seems counterintuitive, but more people are watching post-apocalyptic films and TV shows. And I think it's because it is therapeutic for people, and it helps them to process complex concepts in a way that feels safe.
You brought up COVID, and we were going to touch on it, is, you know, what are you seeing with people overall when we're dealing with such mass isolation, less now for some people who are simply moving on with their lives, whether you believe that they should or not, as far as getting back into socialization is a huge political topic, but months of isolation for almost everyone to some degree, so many unknowns, and, you know, stresses, financial stresses, health stresses. What are you seeing the net of that is? Is it more anxiety, depression, and what are you seeing even in people who come to see you?
Well, you know, from a epidemiological standpoint, we actually have some early data that depression and anxiety is way up. So the US Census Bureau did a study just a month and a half ago, and up to 40% of Americans were saying that they now feel some semblances of depression or anxiety. It doesn't mean that they're diagnosable with like a severe clinical disorder, but certainly that they're contending with this.
40%.
40%. And maybe in most of their lives, they never had to feel this way. And so some of them, it might be very startling to them. Also, suicide hotlines and crisis hotline calls are way up. Some of the ones that are wider in use, ones that are run by the government even, are saying that they're seeing 600% increase compared to the same time last year in 2019. So I definitely think that there's a problem. And I think the problem is, as you mentioned, there's too many unknowns, there's too many fears. And not only that, there's literally no sense of control. I mean, for people who like to plan ahead, and I'm definitely one of those people. I mean, I'm like a self-proclaimed type A person. Like, I've really had to learn some different coping skills to the fact that I can't plan that far ahead, because you never know when anything's going to happen. But that's not really very helpful for most human psyches. You know, we want to feel like we're masters of our own universe. That's how we feel safe emotionally and physically. So I think that long-term sort of effect we're going to start seeing more and more of. And then on top of that, it's like a global pandemic, right? So this is not just this problem that's just in your family or even just in your city. This is like the whole world, and the world hasn't beaten this pandemic yet. I think that makes everybody feel really vulnerable and brings up themes of death, you know, themes of mortality and themes of, you know, your own existential crises. And I don't know, it's too much, you know, it's too much for too long. I think in the beginning of all of this, I saw a lot of people having a better time with it. You know, okay, I can hunker down for a month. I'm going to see the silver linings. And now we're in month 4 or 5 and people are just, you know, they're just done with it.
You mentioned before that the statistics had come out that calls to suicide prevention hotlines and centers was up 600% over last year, which you have to make the direct correlation that's, you know, COVID related. What are some things or tips or things that you can put out for, you know, if someone is feeling depressed, and maybe more so than just feeling a little blue? What if some thoughts were jumping into their heads of, would it be so bad if, or maybe things would be easier if, and what comes after that if.
So I think the first step is really just recognizing that, we all have really, really tough days. All of us are going to have moments where we feel very, very down, and that you're not alone. I think so many people who are depressed and get to that point in time of hopelessness, they kind of feel like they're the only person in the world that feels that way. And it's just not true, right? We just talked about all the statistics of how many people who suffer from it. And, it's really just about reconnecting yourself to the bigger picture. So one, realizing you're not alone in the universe in terms of how you're feeling. And two, trying to remember the meaningful things in your life. What does bring you meaning? What does give you a sense of hope? And making sure to connect to those things. I think that people, like you said, with the isolation, it gets harder because you almost forget sometimes what is meaningful to you, what does bring you that deeper sense of joy. So not that kind of ecstatic happiness that you might feel the first minute you arrive on vacation, but more that like deeper sense of joy that your life means something, and do more of those things. And so a lot of what I tell my patients to do is like really focus on their values. Goals are a little bit different from values because goals you can check off. But values are things that you really want your life to stand for, what you want your life to be about. And so obviously goals can then derive from values. Like if one of your values is adventure or hard work or learning, like you can have goals that obviously relate to those things. But I think sometimes when people get to that very dire state, they've lost touch with what's really meaningful to them, and they've lost touch of themselves as being part of a bigger whole. So really reconnecting with that and not being afraid to call a professional. I think that things have been easier in some ways. The barriers have been removed because it feels very stigmatizing to like have to go to a therapist's office and everybody knows why you're there. Like maybe you're self-judging, but right now, there's so many options for teletherapy. So you can do it in the privacy of your own home.
I've had so many people that, have said, opened up to me about how much they are hurting right now. And I've looked at them and I said, oh man, I'm with you. I get it 1,000%. And they looked at me somewhat surprised. And I tend to be, as an individual, like more quiet in the sense of keeping my own feelings in. I just don't. And but in this topic, in this thing, I've tried to be more, wide open and like, oh yeah, I mean, I get wrecked regularly, up, down, inside out, and and I think people, need to hear that from more people.
Yeah, because it doesn't then it reduces that isolation. Just knowing that one other human being feels the way that you do makes you feel better. It's a weird thing, but I think we all have a little bit of anxiety. Like you said, we all have a little sadness. I was certainly really sad when I saw, for example, some of my own friends and their family members dying from COVID, and then them not being able to have a proper funeral for them,
No closure.
They couldn't even go to the hospital to visit them. I mean, to me, even though that wasn't my family, I was just imagining if that was my family, how horrible and sad and despondent I would be. So I do think that there's something to be said about just sharing those feelings because it's normal.
I want to hit a couple of things in your book that I thought were especially cool about it is, and then I'm going to talk about your animal test too, but you talk about increasing positive emotions, and then you talk about the fear factor. Talk about those two things as they relate to self-sabotage.
Evolutionarily, all human beings really only need two things to survive, and it's avoiding threat and attaining rewards. And that's it. Those are the two things. And if those two things are in balance, then you're doing great. You're surviving and thriving as an individual. And of course, then we're thriving as a species. But sometimes because of certain personality traits or experiences that you've had in your past life, or maybe second guessing yourself, all different types of things could lead you to actually over prioritize avoiding threat. And in the present day, threat is not as much the saber-toothed tiger and whether it'll eat you. Threat is, what if I get turned down for this job? What if I get rejected again when I ask this person out? What if I try to build a business and nobody comes? Those types of things, those emotional and psychological threats to our brain and body feel exactly the same as a physical threat. That's just the way that we're built. And it makes sense because if you look at the research that's out there, emotional survival dictates our physical survival. There's been a lot of studies about social isolation, how it produces chronic illnesses in people. So the mind-body connection is huge. And so basically when people over prioritize threat, the self-sabotage switch is turned on, and they're more likely to get in their own way, despite the fact that they say that they want more for their lives.
But yeah, and it becomes a cycle. It really just ends up being that cycle. And then a couple of other ones, valuing the pursuit of happiness. Almost, telling yourself or believing to yourself that, I used to say that we learn so many things in school, you're taught over the years, but you're not necessarily taught how to have fun. You're not taught how to be happy. You're left to figure that up on your own. And I think a lot of us, and myself included at times, stop and realize that you keep checking the boxes of everything else that was on the list, but man, we forgot to prioritize happiness and fun. I mean,
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think that, as a society, like you were saying, once we start thinking about happiness, though, sometimes we feel like we're just constantly chasing it and we can't get there. And I think that it's because there's really different kinds of happiness. I mean, as I mentioned, there's the happiness when you first get to bite into food when you're super hungry, or, when you first get off the plane at your vacation spot, you're like, yes, I'm here. But then there's also that happiness that comes from living a life well lived, living a life that's full of things that you really value and cherish. And yet when you live a life like that, it's not a promise that you'll be happy all the time, like ecstatic happy. And one really good example would be having children, right? It's people who decide to pursue having kids. It's an amazing experience, but at the same time, it comes with its trials and tribulations. Sometimes it's difficult. You don't get very much sleep in the beginning when you're a new parent, but it's all worth it in the end, because it's a really meaningful pursuit for you to be able to see your children grow up and be able to mold other human beings into hopefully lovely, productive citizens. And it's like that with any big goal. You move across the country, take a chance and start a new job. Not every single moment of that pursuit is going to be ecstatic and positive emotions only, but it's all worth it, right? It's all worth the sacrifice. And that's why I really like values-based work. It's just really think about your values every day and whether or not you're staying in touch with those things that are most important to you.
It made me think for real, about, especially speaking to, an expert about, kids and why you have kids. And my oldest is about to turn 13 and she is spectacular and beautiful and funny and magical. And I could not say enough amazing things about her, but my God, she is sarcastic. And my wife's always like, she is you. And I'm like, oh, I want to apologize to everyone who grew up with, I guess. But literally, she's in this phase right now, and COVID's part of it, where, isolation is hard. So she wants her iPad, her Zoom time with her friends, her iPad, her Zoom time with her friends, and her friends and her iPad, in that order. And it's almost like, so she's, been moody, and we're trying to, help with that. So I see it the other day. I'm like, hi, no response. High five, nothing. I'm like, sweetheart, I'm like, daddy's trying everything else. I'm like, why do you think people have kids? And I was hoping that would make the point, in a kind of fun way for whatever. And she goes, without missing a beat, so that when they're older and can't take care of themselves and they're decrepit and run down and need someone to wipe their butt, that they have companionship. And I'm not wiping your butt when you're older, so don't even think of it. And, I'm like, all right. That was her take on.
Hilarious. She needs to start doing some Zoom comedy routines, because I feel like she's very astute and just gets it. She's sharp, She's like, I know, and I'm not giving it to you, even though I love you.
It would be funny, but the problem is I'd be the butt of all of her jokes. That would be the show, like harpooning my dad or whatever. You have another cool thing that I want to make sure, because I know before we run out of time, that I thought was really cool. I printed it out, and this is your animal types, Dr. Judy's animal types personality test. People can, get a copy of that or find out how to do it when they go to your website. And we'll put that up on screen for everyone, along with your book, a few times throughout this program. But basically, it's a personality type of assessment. And we did it at the office. And what was kind of cool is we did it individually, and then we had other people kind of do it for someone else. So I would fill it out for myself and see what it labeled me as. And then I asked, 4 or 5 of the people here to do it on my behalf and answer the questions about me the way they saw it was. So I think that's always interesting too, is how do you see yourself and how do other people see you, especially in these types of tests. So I came off in my test as a hardcore panther, like beyond belief. I think I broke the scale. And then it was interesting because the 4 other people who did it had me as combos, hybrids of a few that had like panther hybrid with something else. And so it is interesting that there's similarities, but I think we can have different perceptions of ourselves very often that other people do. But it was a pretty cool thing. Do you use that a lot, or people find that effective?
Personality tests are great because people are interested in them. They want to learn more about themselves. And it is a good tool to learn more about your perceptions too, of other people and theirs of yours. And also knowing that we are all built in different ways. But this particular personality test is actually based in scientific theory. It's based in the 4 Temperaments personality test. And I love using it because I think it just helps people start a dialogue, and also certain things start to make sense to you. Like I'm a panther also, but I'm a panther peacock mix. And so with panther still being the bigger part of it.
What about people who like lie and make it up? Like I know for a fact that our producer Dana didn't take it. She just skipped to the part and was like, "Oh, I'm a dolphin." And I'm like, and then I read like what a dolphin. I'm like, you just picked the one that you like the description of because it makes you agreeable, caring. What's that?
I didn't like the description.
You didn't what?
I didn't like the description, but that's who I was.
Oh, please, dolphin. Rational, listen, rational, caring, insightful, peacemaker, patient, relaxed. None of those. I mean, I'm being honest because someone needs to be with you, so you should be thanking me. There's no conceivable way you took this test and it came out to that. So what do you say to people who just, all right, we'll save that for another time. I'm just had to call the record straight. So these are kind of the rapid fire questions that people wanted us to ask you for your answers. So are you ready to get like grilled for about 60 seconds?
Yes, let's do it.
All right. So Love is Blind or 13 Reasons Why on Netflix?
Oh, Love is Blind, I guess. I don't like 13 Reasons Why.
Which Real Housewife should be committed?
Oh my God. You know what? If I watched Real Housewives, then I would know, but I unfortunately would not know where to go with that answer. Sorry.
I know who wrote that question. That is one of the ladies who works here, and that is their biggest guilty pleasure. Which of your 6 tips is your favorite from your book?
I think it's the values-based living that we were just talking about, really starting your day with your values at the core.
Cool. Best activity for reducing stress?
Running.
This one might be a loaded question. Who's your favorite doctor on the Doctors TV show?
All of the doctors. They're all so great.
Most common red flag people miss when dating?
When the relationship goes too fast in the beginning.
2 more. Use 1 word to describe dating in 2020 for people who are dating or want to date.
Isolating.
Yeah. Yuck.
Yuck. Yeah.
And besides your own, what is your favorite podcast that you listen to or follow?
Well, now I'm going to listen to yours and follow yours a lot now that I've discovered it. But I actually listen to Freakonomics. I like that podcast. I learn something new each time. And that's really what I miss about being in school, actually. It's just like continually learning, just discovering things that are new that like have nothing to do with your career. And that's what I've been doing a lot more of in the pandemic. Like I've just been going to YouTube University. I learned to use iMovie, just like things that I never thought I would do.
I read a lot in the prison library during those years on death row. So it was very helpful going back then. And what's funny is you and I realized the other day, just chatting the other day, you and I realized that we are neighbors who live about a block or 2 away. So now I'm like, the fact that when we started talking today, when you thought I actually was on death row twice, you probably were texting your husband like, we got to move. Like, we got to move. Something just came up. Talk to you tonight. Pack it up. A guy who lives a block away from us. Got to tell you about him.
my gosh, I really thought that you had some like amazing, like wrongfully convicted story for me after how we started this podcast. I was like, oh my gosh, did this happen to you? And you're like, no, but you really drove that narrative though. You said you were on death row. I still take issue with that. That's why we went where we did with that whole
This
thing.
is the Panther. That is the Panther of you coming out. Like it stayed with you that I set it up wrong. And I love that.
Yep.
See, you didn't cheat on your test. This is what happens when someone actually takes the test
Yes.
and doesn't dictate the outcome. They get a real answer, you fake dolphin.
Yeah.
Wait. You're supposed to be a peacemaker,
Dolphin-
patient, relaxed, and rational. So be a good dolphin over there, Dana. All right, your book, Stop Self-Sabotage. We have some signed copies by you. We will have something on my Instagram, how people can get the book. You can go to Amazon and buy the book. I highly recommend it. It's really good. We're going to send you like a hat too. We just came out with our As Not Seen on TV hats, which is pretty cool. And it has our logo on the side, which is technically it's the rules, but we block out the word FUCK because we have a little bit of decency, but
Right.
That tends to be the theme of what we try to do with As Not Seen on TV. So we'll send you some swag as well.
Fantastic.
And,
can't wait.
we will see you soon. Thank you. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay well.
Thank you. You too, Drew. That was so much fun. Thank you.